Welcome once again to BEFM Drama. This season will bring you brand new radio plays adapted from the 22 forgotten winter horror books of Charles Dickens. And this weekend we're looking at the parts of the series that he didn't write. Once again, Dickens was really struggling to keep up with the demand of releasing a new novel every winter. So he started outsourcing the work. He got other authors to write short stories for him, tied them together with a bare minimum of plot, and slapped his own name on it. The quality varied greatly. Some of the stories were straight up hot messes. But apparently, A Round of Stories by the Christmas Fire was a hit. People were into it. In fact, it was so financially successful that the next year, in 1853, Dickens decided to do it all over again. He brought back some of the same authors to write a whole new collection of stories, and they called it Another Round of Stories by the Christmas Fire. Dickens himself wrote 2 of them, which we will adapt next weekend. One of them actually is a masterpiece. But this weekend, we're focusing on the ones that he didn't write, but claimed that he did. The ones that were, let's say, not masterpieces. But our goal this season is to adapt the things that have never been adapted before. So I read all of these stories carefully and tried to turn them into something new. Today's story is based on The Old Lady Story by Eliza Lynn Linton, Over the Way Story by George A. Sala, The Angel Story by Adelaide Ann Proctor, The Squire Story by Elizabeth Gaskell, Uncle George's Story by Edmund Saul Dixon and W.H. Wills, The Colonel's Story by Samuel Sidney, and The Scholar's Story by Elizabeth Gaskell and Reverend William Gaskell. Once again, since these stories were not actually written by Dickens, we'll let our main characters, Goblin and Fern, sit this one out, and let another emergency service take over storytelling duties. Bessie and Lurcher are back to share more firefighter tales. Please enjoy another round of stories from the fire department.
Great work out there tonight, everyone. You saved a lot of lives. I just heard from the paramedics that everyone is all right.
That's great news.
Yeah, those guys are so weird, eh? That skinny guy's always talking to himself, and the other one's just obsessed with Little Red Riding Hood.
What's the story behind that?
Who even knows? Hey, speaking of stories though.
Look, you all must be exhausted. Everybody go get some rest.
No, not this time. Lurcher and I have a score to settle.
Excuse me?
We were in the middle of a storytelling contest, remember? I tell stories of fires we fought in the big city. You tell us what happened in your small town and see who tells the best tales. Loser has to do scrub work for a month. And as I recall, we were pretty much tied, no? Especially since half of your stories had nothing to do with firefighting, so they're disqualified. Well, I'm bringing out the big guns now. I've got some wild stories to tell.
All right, I'm happy to listen.
Yeah, you two do whatever you want. I'm going to bed. You let me know how it goes.
All right, here goes. It's not every day you arrive at a fire and find crowds cheering. But that's what happened when the Higgins house burned down.
Do tell.
Now, I must admit, I was sad when I learned that Mr. Higgins, old Mr. Higgins, he'd burnt to a crisp, so he had. I always knew him as a fine, upstanding, benevolent gentleman, a local entrepreneur. He donated money to the fire department, was always a laugh at the fireman's ball. He could sing a good song, tell a good story, and play a good practical joke as well. But it seems the way he acted around us was a little different than the way he acted around those he looked down upon. He always bragged about giving to the less fortunate, but as we put out that fire, I heard so many stories about how he did it. How he'd throw coins into a group of needy people and tell them to fight over them. Throw pennies into dumpsters and laugh as people sifted through putrid trash to find them. They say that once he boiled his coins so that people would be burned as he put them in their hands and never asked for money again. Now, he'd bought up a bunch of land cheap in the poorest part of town and torn down the old apartment buildings that were there to build his own lavish house, but didn't too much enjoy his neighbours. He always called them greedy, lazy thieves that would rather steal than do honest work, but the crowds around the fire said everything he accused others of were things he was guilty of himself. And after he died, the police did some interviewing, Ken, and discovered that all the times he disappeared from town saying he was going to collect his rents coincided with bank robberies in other cities. It seemed that his money was stolen, not made, and it was true. Everything he accused others of were things he was guilty of himself.
Wow, criminal all that time, and no one knew.
We'd seen hints of it in my circles, but they were always ignored. He was always complaining about this woman, Mrs. Hearn. She ran a local homeless shelter. And when she wasn't working there, she was on the street asking for donations to help run it. Mr. Higgins swore up and down that she was a scam artist. Mrs. Hearn, it was all he talked about day after day. Oh, you can't trust that Mrs. Hearn, she steals money, hides it on her walls, etc. No, he'd say, I give to charity and I care for the less fortunate every day, but look at her, not giving but asking for donations, asking for coins, put $1 in the bucket, help someone get back on their feet. She doesn't care about the homeless. She just wants those buckets full of cash. Who's to say that money goes to the needy anyway? I bet she's pocketing it. That modest home of hers, a ruse. I'll bet she's got millions in ill-gotten gains hidden in them walls. I give because I read that charity covers a multitude of sins, but in her case, her charity is covering something far, far worse, and someday I'll uncover it. That's what he said.
Was it true?
Well, sad to admit it, he was so persistent and so charming that we started to believe it. Everyone's thought on Mrs. Hearn was coloured by his wild stories, but no, she never did anything to anybody. On the contrary, we once found out that Mr. Higgins was claiming to have given tens of thousands of dollars to the fire department at parties and on his taxes, but when we looked into it, he donated far, far less. And we hadn't even realised how little he donated. No, we'd always assumed it was a lot because of how much he talked about it. He claimed it was all just a typo on his accountant's behalf and, he'd get it all worked out and all that. So we just forgot about it. But now, I see everything he accused others of were things he was guilty of himself.
How did he come to burn to death in his own home?
He didn't.
But you said...
There were 2 fires that night. The first one was at Mrs. Hearn's house.
Oh no, the old lady with the homeless shelter. Was she okay?
She was found, murdered, in her living room, Bible in her hands. She was dead before the fire began.
Oh no, what happened?
When we went inside, we noticed huge chunks of her walls had been torn out with a sledgehammer. One of those chunks had fallen into the fireplace and started the blaze. It wasn't until we looked inside of one of those holes in the wall that we figured out what had happened.
What?
Mr. Higgins had finally snapped. He was so sure that Mrs. Hearn had millions of dollars stashed in her walls that he broke into her house. He killed her and he tore the place apart looking for it.
What did you find in the wall?
Mr. Higgins, or at least what was left of him. He'd gotten trapped in her wall and burned to death in a fire of his own making.
Oh my goodness. How did the second fire begin?
No one knows. But while we were busy putting out the fire at Mrs. Hearn's house, someone set fire to the Higgins place. Now my guess is that someone was just so happy he was gone that they decided to burn all traces of him. But what we do know is that no one in town was in too much of a hurry to help put out the fire or call for help. By the time we heard about it and made it there, the house was already burned to the ground. The crowd stood around it, cheering. It was shortly after that we learned about the millions of dollars he had stolen from banks all around the country.
So what happened to all the money?
Well, no one knows. Wasn't in the bank. He sure didn't give it to charity. But remember what I told you about he always accused Mrs. Hearn of hiding millions of dollars in her walls?
You don't mean...
Everything he accused others of were things he were guilty of himself.
All that money probably burned up in the fire.
Probably. It's a pretty good one. I pretty much win at this point. Do you have a story that can top that?
Well, many years ago, we had a thief caught at the scene of a fire once, too.
What happened?
I was actually at a wedding when I got the call that George was trapped in a fire. The sigh of relief from the crowd was huge.
Ah, no one liked George either.
Oh, no, that wasn't it. It was George's wedding. He hadn't shown up yet, and everybody was worried that he'd left his poor wife at the altar. So they were just happy to get an explanation. They rushed me out the door to go save him.
How did he get trapped in a fire during his own wedding?
Well, George was running a little late because he'd spent all afternoon setting up a romantic atmosphere in his apartment for after the wedding. Flowers, candles, all that kind of thing. When he realized he was late, he had to run, but he forgot to blow out the candles. He rushed out the door all dressed up in his tux, struggling to tie his bow tie.
Well, if he left the building, how did he get trapped in a fire?
He noticed something that made him go back inside again. In the back of his building, there were some crowbar marks and a broken door. He realized that someone had broken into the basement of his building. He rushed back inside to his own apartment to get a flashlight and a baseball bat, and took the elevator back down to investigate. Well, in his rush to leave again, he slammed the door and one of the candles fell and started the fire. The elevator got stuck and started filling with smoke. He pounded and pounded on the doors until someone came and rescued him.
Was it you?
Nope, it was a guy named Leroy, the same guy that had broken in to rob him.
Wow. So you put out that fire and the police arrested Leroy?
No, ma'am. George invited him to the wedding. Gave him a toast at the reception for saving his life. Years later, George and Leroy's children got married, making them brothers. I was at that wedding too. Actually, I had the day off for it. No fires that day.
That story was okay, but how about this one? There was a fire at this fancy penthouse downtown. We found a woman named Lizzie unconscious, and the paramedics rushed her off to the hospital. We took care of the fire, of course, but it seemed like a possible arson. I found some suspicious fingerprints on the outside of the window and some footprints on the fire escape. The police got the security camera footage and found footage of a man climbing the fire escape and sneaking into her apartment, not just once, but several nights in a row. The police hunted him down and found him almost immediately. It was an African-American fella named Felix. Placed him under arrest. It wasn't until Lizzie came to that she explained everything. Felix wasn't her arsonist. He was her husband. Lizzie came from a very rich but very racist family, and they told her that if she and Felix got married, they'd cut her off and take away her penthouse. Well, they were married in secret, and he would sneak into the window to see her while they prepared to run away together.
So who started the fire?
It was a curling iron the whole time. I learned a lot about jumping to conclusions that day.
We had a case of secrets between a husband and wife leading to prison time once.
Oh, do tell.
This fellow was a newlywed with a beautiful wife and a beautiful home. Shortly after his wedding, he went off to war and asked his cousin to keep an eye on his new wife for him while he was gone, help her maintain the house, that sort of thing. The cousin agreed. But while he was overseas, he started getting letters from the cousin, telling him that his wife was being unfaithful, running around town with other men, bringing him back to the new house. The husband was heartbroken, but he didn't say anything to his wife. Then he got a letter about how the wife was destroying the new house, that the windows were broken, the heater was busted, the basement was flooded, and she wouldn't let him do anything about it. Said she wouldn't even let him in the door. But the husband still kept it secret. But he was so mad that when he got home from leave, he didn't even go to see his wife. He waited until she left the home and burned it down in a rage. We put out the fire, and the police arrested him. He was calmly sitting in the front yard waiting to serve his wife divorce papers. But then, he was taken to a jail cell. His wife came to visit him in jail. She calmly explained that his cousin had been stalking and harassing her the whole time, asking her out on dates. When she said no, he threatened to make up stories about her to the husband. When she wouldn't let him in the house, he would break things and try and use them as an excuse to come inside and fix them.
Wow. So, did they learn to work out their differences?
Far from it. She signed those divorce papers, told him that he and his crazy family were never to speak to her again, and left town for good. He stayed in jail for arson, and after some investigation, his cousin joined him there.
These are all some crazy tales.
Look, I don't mind doing all the grunt work. I know I have a lot of experience back in my hometown, but here I'm the rookie, so I'm happy to do my part. I didn't really want to make you do all the scrub work. I just like hearing your stories.
Do you know what? Let me tell you just one last story.
Always happy to listen.
It's about Lieutenant Bernard. Now, he's been around a long time, and he didn't used to have the reputation he does now. People hated him. Aye, he was always so mean, especially to rookies. Way back, when my dad was in this company, Lieutenant always hated him because one day, way back when I was a kid, my dad had borrowed $10 out of petty cash because I was sick and he needed medicine. So he paid it back the next day, but Lieutenant Bernard found out and he tried to have him arrested. I mean, nothing came of it, of course. But Bernard always carried a grudge. So when I grew up and decided to become a firefighter myself, he took that grudge out on me. He wanted me to give up. So he announced that I would not start as a firefighter, but as his assistant. But I did it. He gave me the worst of the worst grunt work, but I did it. He had me scrubbing the floor with a toothbrush, climbing ladders to dust the inside of the alarm bells. But I had known since I was a kid that I was going to be a firefighter. So then I didn't let him stop me. I worked so hard that his bosses took notice and made him promote me. Then I kept working so hard that he realised how wrong he'd been. And he softened up a wee bit. He came a bit kinder, ken. And I'll admit, I get jealous when new folks come on and have an easier time than I did. But I don't want to carry on that grudge to you like he did for me. And I like your stories. And you've worked hard, you've earned your place. Hey, what do you say we tell him to forget his competition and we share the grunt work?
It's a deal. We can handle it together.
But we do agree that I won, right? I mean, I'm both better than you and kinder because I gave up my reward because I'm such a good person.
Oh, there goes the alarm again. Guess I don't have time to respond to that.
Well, at least whatever happens out there, we'll both get a wee story to tell about it. My version will be better than yours, though.
Whatever you say. Thank you for listening to BEFM Drama. This was another round of stories from the fire department, based on another round of stories by the Christmas fire, by Linton, Sala, Proctor, Dixon, Wills, Sidney, Gaskell, and Gaskell. This radio play was written by me, Ryan Estrada, and starred Laura McLucky as Bessie, and me as Lurcher and Bernard. Hidden Agenda, Unwritten Return, Mist on the Moor, Gagool, and Twisting are by Kevin McLeod of Incompetech and released under Creative Commons Attribution License. Next week, Goblin and Fern will return. Thank you for listening to BEFM Drama.